When a desperate single father answers a bizarre online ad offering $10,000 to fake a relationship for one weekend, he has no idea the ice-cold billionaire hiring him will risk her life to save his daughter, or that their carefully constructed lie will become the most dangerous love either of them has ever known. If you want to see how a fake romance turns into a fight for survival, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The eviction notice felt like sandpaper against Landon Pierce's fingertips. He read it 3 times, standing in the narrow hallway outside his apartment while Sophie's cartoon played too loudly through the thin door. 7 days. They had 7 days before the landlord changed the locks and threw everything they owned onto the street. Landon folded the paper and shoved it deep into his jacket pocket, forcing his face into something resembling calm before turning the doorknob. Sophie sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she laughed at the television screen. She didn't notice him come in. She never noticed how the walls were closing in. "Hey, Bug," he called, dropping his keys onto the counter that separated their cramped kitchen from the living room. "Daddy!" Sophie scrambled to her feet and crashed into his legs, wrapping her small arms around his knees. "You're home early." "Shift got cut." Landon ruffled her hair, ignoring the sick twist in his stomach. 4 hours lost meant $40 gone. $40 that could have bought groceries or kept the lights on another week. Sophie pulled back and looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that still carried her mother's warmth. "Can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" "Sure, Bug." He managed a smile. "Go wash your hands." She skipped toward the bathroom, humming off-key, and Landon let his smile collapse the moment she disappeared around the corner. He pulled open the refrigerator. 1/2 gallon of milk. A block of cheese he'd been rationing for 3 days. 2 eggs. The box of macaroni in the cabinet was their last one. He'd been hungry before, plenty of times since Claire died. But watching Sophie eat smaller portions because he couldn't afford to feed her properly made him feel like something hollowed out and discarded. The water ran in the bathroom. Landon pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, even though he already knew what he'd find. $47.18. Rent was $1,200. The medical bills from Claire's accident still came every month like clockwork, each one stamped with red letters and threats from collection agencies. He'd stopped opening them weeks ago, 7 days. He closed the app and stared at his phone's cracked screen, his thumb hovering over the browser. He'd been avoiding this all week, telling himself things would turn around, that he'd pick up extra shifts, that something would break his way for once. But desperation had a way of making a man do things he swore he'd never consider. Landon opened an incognito tab and typed the words he'd been trying to forget. Quick money. No experience. The results were exactly what he expected. Scams, pyramid schemes, and ads that promised wealth with an asterisk the size of a billboard. He scrolled past them all, his jaw tight, until something near the bottom of the page caught his eye. Discreet arrangement, $10,000 for one weekend. Must be presentable, articulate, and available immediately. Serious inquiries only. $10,000. Landon's pulse kicked up. He clicked the link before his brain could talk him out of it. The page was simple, almost clinical. No photos, no flashy graphics, just a short paragraph of text and a contact form at the bottom. Seeking a male companion for a family event this weekend. Must be comfortable with public appearances and capable of maintaining professional discretion. Compensation is $10,000 for approximately 48 hours of your time. Background check required. Reply with photo and brief personal details. Landon read it twice, then a third time. A family event. Professional discretion. It sounded legitimate, or at least legitimate enough that it might not be a scam. But $10,000 for a weekend? Nobody paid that kind of money unless they wanted something specific. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Sophie's voice snapped him back. Sophie's voice. He locked his phone and shoved it into his pocket. "Coming, Bug." He made the mac and cheese, stretching it with extra milk to make it last. Sophie chattered about her day at school while he pushed noodles around his bowl, barely tasting them. When she finished, he let her watch another episode of her show while he cleaned up, his phone burning a hole in his pocket the entire time. After Sophie went to bed, Landon sat on the couch in the dark and stared at the eviction notice spread out on the coffee table. 7 days. He pulled out his phone and opened the ad again. What did he have to lose? He took a photo of himself in the bathroom mirror, trying to look less exhausted than he felt. Then he filled out the form with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Name: Landon Pierce. Age: 32. Occupation: warehouse worker. Brief background: single father. Reliable. Discreet. He hesitated over the submit button for a full minute before finally pressing it. The page refreshed with a simple confirmation message. Your inquiry has been received. You will be contacted within 24 hours if selected. Landon locked his phone and dropped it onto the couch beside him. He felt ridiculous, desperate, like a man who'd run out of options and started grasping at shadows. He didn't sleep that night. The response came 16 hours later while he was stacking boxes in the warehouse. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he almost ignored it until he saw the unfamiliar number on the screen. Mr. Pierce, your application has been reviewed. Please call this number at your earliest convenience to discuss the arrangement. A.S. Landon's hands went numb. He read the message 3 times, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was real. Someone had actually responded. He waited until his lunch break, then walked out to the parking lot and dialed the number with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered. This is Aurora Sinclair. The name hit him like cold water. Aurora Sinclair. He'd heard it before, seen it in headlines he never paid much attention to. Tech billionaire, self-made, ruthless. Landon cleared his throat. This is Landon Pierce. I got your message. Mr. Pierce. Her voice was crisp, efficient, like she was reading from a script. Thank you for responding promptly. I assume you've read the details of the arrangement? The ad, yeah, but it didn't say much. That was intentional? There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. I'll be direct, Mr. Pierce. I need someone to pose as my boyfriend for a family visit this weekend. My parents are flying in from the East Coast, and I'd prefer not to spend the entire time answering questions about why I'm still single at 30. Landon blinked. You want to pay me $10,000 to pretend to be your boyfriend? That's correct. For a weekend. Approximately 48 hours, yes. Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. He leaned against his truck, trying to process what he was hearing. Why me? You have a daughter. Aurora's tone didn't change. That makes you seem stable, trustworthy. My parents will appreciate that. You ran a background check already? I run background checks on everyone, Mr. Pierce. You have no criminal record, no debts beyond medical bills, and you've been employed at the same warehouse for 3 years. You're exactly what I need. The clinical way she said it made his skin crawl, but $10,000 was $10,000. And all I have to do is show up and pretend we're together? You'll need to be convincing. My parents aren't stupid. But yes, that's the extent of it. You'll stay in my penthouse for the weekend, attend a few meals, and play the role of a supportive partner. Nothing physical beyond what's necessary to sell the illusion. Landon closed his eyes. This was insane. Absolutely insane. I'll pay you $5,000 up front, Aurora continued, as if sensing his hesitation. The remaining $5,000 when the weekend is over. If you're interested, I'll need an answer within the hour. $5,000. Enough to pay rent and buy groceries and keep the lights on. Enough to breathe. I'm interested, Landon heard himself say. Good. I'll have my assistant send you the address and a list of details you'll need to memorize. We'll meet tomorrow evening to go over the story. Don't be late, Mr. Pierce. The line went dead before he could respond. Landon stood in the parking lot staring at his phone, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Look, the address Aurora's assistant sent him was in a part of the city Landon had only seen from the highway. Gleaming high-rises, valet parking, doormen in suits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He felt like an imposter the moment he stepped out of his truck. The doorman didn't even blink. Name? Landon Pierce. I'm here to see Aurora Sinclair. The man checked a tablet, nodded, and gestured toward the elevator. Penthouse, she's expecting you. Landon rode the elevator alone, watching the floor numbers climb higher and higher until they ran out. The doors opened directly into Aurora's apartment, and he stepped out into a space so vast and cold, it felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, sleek furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than his truck. Everything was white and gray and untouched, like a photograph of a life nobody actually lived. Mr. Pierce, he turned. Aurora Sinclair stood in the doorway of what looked like a home office, wearing a tailored black suit and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. She was younger than he expected, maybe 30, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look even more severe. Miss Sinclair. Landon shifted his weight. Suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his jeans and work boots. Aurora's eyes swept over him once, clinical and assessing. You'll need different clothes. I'll have something sent over. Nice to meet you too, Landon muttered. Her gaze snapped back to his face. Excuse me? Nothing. He forced himself to meet her eyes. You wanted to go over the story? Aurora studied him for another moment, then turned and walked toward the living room. Follow me. She sat on the edge of a white couch that looked like it had never been used and gestured for him to sit across from her. Landon lowered himself onto the chair, feeling like he might break something just by breathing wrong. Aurora pulled a tablet from the side table and swiped through a few screens. My parents arrive Friday at 6. We'll pick them up from the airport together. You'll need to act naturally affectionate but not excessive. A hand on the small of my back. Casual touches. Nothing that would make them uncomfortable. Landon nodded slowly. Okay. They'll want to know how we met. We'll say it was at a charity event 6 months ago. You were volunteering, I was hosting. We started talking, exchanged numbers, and began seeing each other casually. It became serious about 3 months ago. 6 months is a long time to keep a relationship secret. Aurora's expression didn't flicker. I'm a private person. They'll believe it. What about my daughter, Bud? Sophie. Aurora glanced at her tablet. 6 years old, attending Lincoln Elementary. Your wife died 2 years ago in a car accident. The way she said it, flat, emotionless, like she was reading a grocery list, made Landon's chest tighten. Her name was Claire. Aurora looked up. Something shifted in her eyes, barely perceptible. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you? The words came out harsher than he intended, but Aurora didn't flinch. She set the tablet down and folded her hands in her lap. No, I don't know you, Mr. Pierce. I don't know your wife, but I understand loss, and I know that saying I'm sorry is what people expect. Landon leaned back in his chair, studying her. There was something hollow about the way she spoke, like she'd spent so long building walls around herself that she'd forgotten how to sound human. My parents will want to meet Sophie, Aurora continued. I'll arrange for her to join us for dinner Saturday night. You'll need to prepare her. Make sure she understands this is temporary. She's 6. She doesn't understand temporary. Then make something up. Aurora's tone sharpened. Tell her we're playing pretend. Tell her it's a game. I don't care how you do it, but she can't give us away. Landon's jaw tightened. She won't. Good. Aurora stood, smoothing her suit jacket. The clothes will arrive tomorrow morning. Wear the gray suit Friday. Business casual for Saturday. I'll send you a full schedule. Anything else? She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Don't make me regret hiring you, Mr. Pierce. Landon stood and met her gaze. Don't make me regret taking the job. For the first time, something almost like amusement flickered across Aurora's face. We'll see. The gray suit fit perfectly, which annoyed Landon more than it should have. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror Friday evening, adjusting the tie for the 3rd time and feeling like a fraud. Sophie sat on the edge of the tub, swinging her legs and watching him with wide, curious eyes. You look fancy, Daddy. I feel ridiculous, Landon muttered. Where are you going? He crouched down to her level, taking her small hands in his. Remember how I told you I'm helping someone this weekend? Sophie nodded. The nice lady. Right. Well, she needs me to pretend to be her boyfriend so her parents don't worry about her. Like playing house? Exactly like that. Landon brushed a strand of hair from her face. And tomorrow night, you're going to meet her and her parents at dinner. Can you help me pretend? Sophie's face lit up. I'm good at pretending. I know you are, Bug. He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Mrs. Chen is going to stay with you tonight, okay? I'll be back tomorrow. Okay. Sophie squeezed him tight. Don't forget to smile, Daddy. Boyfriends are supposed to smile. Landon laughed despite himself. I'll try. He kissed the top of her head and stood, grabbing his keys from the counter. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched Sophie when Landon worked late, was already waiting in the living room with a crossword puzzle. You look handsome, she said, giving him an approving nod. Thanks, Mrs. Chen. Landon grabbed his jacket. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Take your time. Sophie and I will have fun. Landon drove to the airport in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. Aurora had sent him detailed instructions: which terminal, where to park, what time to meet her at the arrivals gate. He followed them mechanically, his mind somewhere else entirely. He found her waiting near the baggage claim, standing apart from the crowd in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than his truck. She looked up as he approached, her expression neutral. You're on time, she said. You sound surprised. I've learned not to expect much from people. Aurora glanced past him toward the arrivals board. Their flight landed 10 minutes ago. They should be here soon. Landon stood beside her, unsure what to do with his hands. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Relax, Aurora said, without looking at him. You look like you're about to be interrogated. I feel like I am. My parents are harmless. Just follow my lead. Before Landon could respond, Aurora's entire demeanor shifted. Her shoulders softened, her expression warmed, and she stepped forward with her arms outstretched. Mom, Dad! An older couple emerged from the crowd, both smiling broadly. Aurora's mother was small and elegant, her gray hair styled in soft waves. Her father was tall and sturdy, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Aurora, sweetheart! Her mother pulled her into a tight hug, and for a moment Landon saw something genuine flash across Aurora's face before she buried it again. It's so good to see you. Aurora pulled back and turned toward Landon, her hand finding his with practiced ease. Mom, Dad, this is Landon. Her father extended his hand, his grip strong and assessing. Richard Sinclair. It's a pleasure to meet you, son. Landon Pierce, sir. The pleasure's mine. Aurora's mother beamed at him, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Oh, he's handsome, Aurora. You didn't mention how handsome he is. Mom. Aurora's voice carried a hint of embarrassment that almost sounded real. I'm just saying. Her mother reached up and patted Landon's cheek. It's lovely to meet you, Landon. I'm Margaret. Please, call me Maggie. Nice to meet you, Maggie. Richard clapped a hand on Landon's shoulder. So you're the man who finally got our daughter to slow down long enough to fall in love. I have to say, I didn't think it was possible. Aurora's hand tightened around Landon's. Dad, don't start. What? I'm allowed to be surprised. You've been married to your company for so long. We thought you'd forgotten how to have a personal life. Landon felt Aurora tense beside him, and without thinking, he slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her closer. She works hard, but she makes time for what matters. Richard's expression softened. I can see that. They collected the luggage and headed to Aurora's car, a sleek black sedan that Landon was terrified to drive, but somehow ended up behind the wheel of anyway. Aurora sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on his knee in a way that looked natural but felt calculated. Her parents chattered in the back, asking questions about the city and the weather and how Aurora had been. So Landon, Maggie said, leaning forward, Aurora mentioned you have a daughter? Yes, ma'am. Sophie. She's 6. Oh, how wonderful. We'd love to meet her. She's joining us for dinner tomorrow, Aurora interjected smoothly. I thought it would be nice for you to get to know her. Richard chuckled. Already planning family dinners? You two must be serious. Landon glanced at Aurora, whose expression remained perfectly composed. We are, she said simply. The penthouse felt different with people in it. Maggie and Richard filled the cold, sterile space with warmth and laughter, unpacking their bags and commenting on the view. Aurora moved through it all with the grace of someone playing a role, smiling at the right moments, laughing when expected. But Landon saw the cracks, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the stiffness in her shoulders when her mother hugged her, the distance she maintained even when she was standing right next to him. Dinner was catered, of course it was, and they ate at the long glass table overlooking the city. Maggie asked Landon about his work, his daughter, his life before Aurora. He answered carefully, sticking to the truth where he could and improvising when necessary. "And how did you two meet?" Richard asked, pouring himself another glass of wine. Aurora glanced at Landon, and he picked up the thread without missing a beat. "Charity event 6 months ago. Aurora was hosting, and I was volunteering." "Love at first sight?" Maggie teased. "Not exactly." Landon looked at Aurora, surprised to find her looking back at him. "She intimidated the hell out of me." Aurora's lips twitched. "You didn't show it. I'm good at faking confidence." Richard laughed. "I like this one, Aurora. He's honest." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and wine and carefully constructed lies. By the time Maggie and Richard retired to the guest room, Landon's face hurt from smiling. Aurora closed the door to her office and turned to face him, the warmth draining from her expression like water through a sieve. "You did well." "Thanks." Landon loosened his tie, suddenly exhausted. "Where am I sleeping?" "Guest suite, down the hall, second door on the left." She moved to her desk and opened her laptop. "We'll have breakfast with them at 9. Try to look rested." Landon stared at her, this woman who could turn her emotions on and off like a light switch. "Do you ever stop performing?" Aurora's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." She straightened, her expression hardening. "This is a business arrangement, Mr. Pierce. Don't mistake it for anything else." "I'm not. But your parents aren't idiots. They're going to notice if you keep acting like a robot every time they're not looking. I'm paying you to play a role, not to psychoanalyze me." Landon held up his hands. "Fine, forget I said anything." He turned toward the hallway, but Aurora's voice stopped him. "Landon?" He looked back. She was still standing by her desk, but something in her posture had shifted, softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for tonight. You made it easier." Landon nodded. "Good night, Aurora." He found the guest suite and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing the suit, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Sophie was vibrating with excitement when Landon picked her up Saturday afternoon. She'd insisted on wearing her favorite dress, pink with sparkles, and had made Mrs. Chen braid her hair twice until it was perfect. "Do I look pretty, Daddy?" "You look beautiful, Bug." Landon buckled her into the back seat of his truck, his stomach twisting with nerves. "Remember, we're just pretending, okay? Miss Aurora and I aren't really together." "I know, it's like a game." "Right, exactly." But as he drove toward Aurora's building, Landon couldn't shake the feeling that this game was about to get a lot more complicated. Aurora met them in the lobby, and Landon barely recognized her. She'd traded her usual severe suit for a soft blue sweater and jeans, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, human. "You must be Sophie," Aurora said, crouching down to Sophie's level. Sophie stared at her with wide eyes, suddenly shy. "Hi. I've heard a lot about you." Aurora's smile looked almost genuine. "Your dad says you're really good at pretending." Sophie nodded, still clutching Landon's hand. "Good, because we're going to play a game tonight. Can you help me?" "Okay." Aurora stood and met Landon's eyes, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Then she turned and led them toward the elevator. Maggie fell in love with Sophie the moment she walked through the door. She pulled the little girl into a hug, exclaiming over her dress and her braids. And within minutes, Sophie was chattering away like they'd known each other for years. Richard watched Aurora carefully as she interacted with Sophie, and Landon saw something shift in the older man's expression. Approval, relief. "She's wonderful with her," Maggie whispered to Landon while Aurora helped Sophie pick out a movie to watch before dinner. "Sophie has that effect on people," Landon said. No. Maggie squeezed his arm. I mean Aurora. I've never seen her like this. Landon looked over at Aurora, who was kneeling beside Sophie, listening intently as the little girl explained the intricate plot of some animated film. Aurora's expression was soft, unguarded, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like someone who wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She's different around you, Maggie continued. Both of you. Happier. Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and took another sip of his drink. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Sophie spilled her juice, Richard told terrible dad jokes, and Maggie recounted embarrassing stories from Aurora's childhood. Aurora rolled her eyes and protested, but Landon caught her smiling when she thought no one was looking. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, curled up against Aurora's side. Aurora didn't move, didn't wake her, just sat there with her hand resting gently on Sophie's back. She's out, Landon said softly, coming to stand beside them. Aurora looked up at him, and something in her eyes made his breath catch. She's sweet. Yeah, she is. You're lucky. Landon crouched down and carefully scooped Sophie into his arms. She mumbled something incoherent and buried her face against his shoulder. I know. Aurora stood, her hand lingering on Sophie's hair for just a moment before she pulled away. I'll walk you out. What? They said their goodbyes to Maggie and Richard, who hugged them both and made them promise to come for breakfast the next morning. Aurora rode the elevator down with them, her hands shoved into her pockets, her gaze fixed on the floor numbers. Today was good, she said as they reached the lobby. Yeah, it was. Aurora looked at Sophie, still sleeping soundly in Landon's arms. She's going to remember this, you know, even if it's not real. I know. Landon shifted Sophie's weight, his chest tight. I'll make sure she understands. Aurora nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Good night, Landon. Good night. He carried Sophie to the truck and buckled her in, watching Aurora's silhouette disappear back into the building. Something had shifted between them today, something he couldn't quite name, and it scared the hell out of him. Basak. Sunday morning came too fast. Landon woke to a text from Aurora with the address of a brunch place her parents wanted to try. He dressed Sophie in her favorite overalls and drove across town, his mind already running through the motions of their final performance. Aurora was waiting outside the restaurant with her parents, and the moment Sophie saw her, she broke into a run. Miss Aurora! Aurora caught her, lifting her up in a hug that looked entirely natural. Good morning, sweetheart. It's he. Maggie beamed. Oh, look at you two. You're naturals. Richard clapped Landon on the back. You've got yourself a good setup here, son. Don't screw it up. Landon forced a laugh. I'll do my best. Brunch was loud and messy and warm. Sophie sat between Aurora and Maggie, stealing bites of pancakes and making everyone laugh with her terrible knock-knock jokes. Aurora played along, her walls down in a way Landon hadn't seen before. When it was time to say goodbye, Maggie pulled Aurora into a long hug. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You've built an incredible life. But this, she gestured to Landon and Sophie, this is what matters. Don't forget that. Aurora's expression flickered. I won't, Mom. Richard hugged Landon, his voice low. Take care of her. She acts tough, but she's not as strong as she pretends. I will, Landon said, and meant it more than he should have. They dropped Maggie and Richard at the airport, waving until they disappeared through security. The drive back to the city was quiet. Sophie dozing in the back seat, Aurora staring out the window. You okay? Landon asked. Aurora didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I forgot what it felt like to have a family. Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he just reached over and squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. When they reached her building, Aurora turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral again. I'll have the rest of the payment transferred to your account tonight. Aurora, thank you, Landon, for everything. She got out of the car before he could respond, disappearing into the building without looking back. Landon sat there for a long moment, Sophie still asleep behind him, his chest aching in a way he didn't understand. The weekend was over, the lie was finished. So why did it feel like he'd just lost something real? The money hit Landon's account Monday morning while he was stacking boxes in the warehouse. His phone buzzed, and he pulled it out expecting another past due notice. Instead, he stared at the notification that showed a deposit of $5,000. The second half of their arrangement, clean, professional, finished. He should have felt relieved. He paid his rent that afternoon, walked into the landlord's office, and handed over a cashier's check that wiped the smug expression right off the man's face. He bought groceries, real groceries, not the cheapest options he could find. He paid down enough of Claire's medical bills that the collection calls stopped for a while. For the first time in 2 years, Landon could breathe without feeling like he was drowning. So why did he keep checking his phone, waiting for a message that never came? Sophie asked about Aurora every day that week. When were they going to see Miss Aurora again? Could they invite her over for dinner? Did Miss Aurora like the drawing Sophie had made for her? "Bug, I told you," Landon said on Thursday night, helping her into her pajamas. "Miss Aurora and I were just pretending. It was for her parents." Sophie's face scrunched up in confusion. "But she was nice, and you smiled a lot." "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes grown-ups have to pretend for work. That's dumb." Landon couldn't argue with that. Friday evening, he was washing dishes when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" "Landon, it's Aurora." His hands went still in the soapy water. He hadn't expected to hear from her again. "Hey, is everything okay?" There was a pause, long enough that Landon wondered if the call had dropped. Then Aurora's voice came through, quieter than he remembered. "My mother called today. She wanted to know when she could see Sophie again." Landon dried his hands on a towel. "What did you tell her?" "That we've both been busy, but she's persistent." Another pause. "She invited us to their lake house next month, all of us." "Aurora, I know this wasn't part of the arrangement, but if I say no, she'll get suspicious. And if she gets suspicious, she'll start asking questions I can't answer." Landon leaned against the counter, his mind racing. "So what are you asking?" "Another weekend. I'll pay you the same amount. I don't want your money." The words came out before he could stop them, surprising both of them into silence. "Then what do you want?" Aurora asked finally. Landon didn't have an answer for that. "I need to think about it." "Take your time. The invitation is for 3 weeks from now. Let me know." She hung up before he could respond. Landon set his phone down and stared at it, Sophie's voice drifting in from the living room as she sang along to some cartoon. He thought about Aurora sitting alone in that massive penthouse, pretending she had a life she didn't actually live. He thought about the way she'd looked with Sophie curled up against her, unguarded and almost peaceful. He picked up his phone and typed out a message before he could talk himself out of it. "I'll do it, but we need to talk first." Aurora's response came 30 seconds later. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. My place, up at..." Well, Landon left Sophie with Mrs. Chen and drove to Aurora's building Saturday evening, his stomach tight with something that wasn't quite nervousness. The doorman waved him through without checking the list this time, and Landon wondered how many other men Aurora hired to play pretend in her life. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. It was the third time he'd seen her look human, and it still caught him off guard. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The penthouse looked the same, cold, pristine, unlived in. But there was a wine glass on the coffee table and a blanket draped over the couch. Small signs that someone actually existed here. "Want a drink?" Aurora asked, already pouring herself another glass of red. "Sure." She handed him the glass and sat on the couch, tucking her legs underneath her. Landon sat across from her, the same configuration as their first meeting, but the energy between them felt different now. "Thank you for coming," Aurora said. "You knew I would." "I hoped." She took a sip of wine, "but I wasn't sure." Landon studied her. Without the armor of her business suits and severe expressions, she looked younger, tired. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this? The whole fake relationship thing. Your parents love you. They'd accept you being single." Aurora's jaw tightened. "Would they?" "Yeah, I think they would. You don't know them like I do." She set her glass down and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "My mother has been asking when I'm going to settle down since I was 25. My father keeps making comments about how the company won't keep me warm at night. They mean well, but they don't understand. Understand what? Aurora looked at him, and for the first time he saw something raw in her expression. That I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I built a company from nothing. I negotiate billion-dollar deals. I run a business with 3,000 employees. But I don't know how to be the daughter they want. I don't know how to have a normal life. Landon leaned forward. So you hire someone to fake it for you. Buffa. I'm not faking caring about them. She stopped, searching for words. It's easier to show them what they want to see than to explain why I can't give it to them. That's exhausting. Yes. Aurora's voice cracked slightly. It is. They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. Landon thought about his own life, the ways he'd been faking it since Claire died, pretending he was fine when he was falling apart, pretending he had everything under control when he was one missed paycheck away from losing everything. Maybe they weren't so different after all. What happened to your fiancé? Landon asked quietly. Aurora's eyes widened slightly. How did you... Your dad mentioned it that first night. He said you'd been married to your company for years. She looked away. His name was Marcus. We were supposed to get married 5 years ago. Her voice went flat, mechanical. He died 3 weeks before the wedding. Aneurysm. He was 28 years old. Aurora, I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. She picked up her wine glass again. But sorry doesn't change anything. So I did what I do best. I worked. I built the company into something bigger, something that mattered, and I convinced myself that was enough. Is it? Aurora met his eyes. No. The honesty in that single word hit Landon harder than he expected. He set down his wine glass and crossed the space between them, sitting on the couch beside her. I get it, he said. After Claire died, I threw myself into taking care of Sophie. Every moment was about her, making sure she ate, making sure she was okay, making sure she didn't see me fall apart. I told myself that as long as she was happy, nothing else mattered. But it did, Aurora said softly. Yeah, it did. Landon ran a hand through his hair. I was so focused on being her dad that I forgot how to be anything else. I don't have friends anymore. I don't have hobbies. I work. I come home. I take care of Sophie and I go to bed. That's it. That's my whole life. Aurora looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. We're both pretty good at running away, aren't we? Seems like it. She reached out and touched his hand, her fingers cold against his. I don't want to do this alone anymore. The pretending. It was easier when I thought I could just hire someone and keep everything compartmentalized. But after last weekend, she stopped, shaking her head. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired. Landon turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. So let's stop pretending. Aurora's breath caught. What do you mean? Well, I mean, we're already in this together. We might as well be honest with each other. He squeezed her hand. I'll go to your parents' lake house. I'll play the boyfriend role. But when it's just us, no more walls, no more performing, deal? She stared at him for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering across her face. Then she nodded. Deal. They sat there on the couch, hands intertwined, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable. Outside, the city hummed and glowed, oblivious to the two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole again. Can I tell you something? Aurora asked. Yeah. Last weekend was the happiest I've been in 5 years. Landon's chest tightened. Yeah, me too. The 3 weeks before the lake house trip passed in a strange blur. Aurora started texting Landon randomly. Nothing important, just observations about her day or questions about Sophie. He found himself responding, their conversations stretching longer each time. One Tuesday afternoon, his phone buzzed while he was on lunch break. I just sat through the most boring board meeting of my life. Someone actually said, let's circle back and touch base offline. I wanted to throw my laptop. Landon laughed out loud, earning weird looks from his coworkers. Sounds terrible. I'm eating a sandwich that's 90% bread because I forgot to buy lunch meat. That's depressing. Welcome to my life. There was a pause, then another message. What's Sophie's favorite restaurant? Landon stared at his phone, confused. She's 6. Her favorite restaurant is anywhere that has chicken nuggets. Why? Just curious. That Friday, Aurora showed up at Landon's apartment building at 6 o'clock, wearing jeans and a casual jacket and looking completely out of place in his neighborhood. She was holding a bag from some restaurant he'd never heard of. "What are you doing here?" Landon asked, opening the door in his work clothes, still sweaty from the warehouse. "You said Sophie likes chicken nuggets." Aurora held up the bag. "I brought dinner." Sophie appeared beside Landon, her eyes wide. "Miss Aurora." Tom. She launched herself at Aurora, who caught her with a surprised laugh. "Hi, sweetheart. You came to visit." "I did." Aurora looked at Landon over Sophie's head, something uncertain in her expression. "If that's okay." Landon stepped aside. "Yeah, come in." His apartment looked even smaller and shabbier with Aurora standing in it. She didn't seem to notice. She set the food on the counter and let Sophie drag her to the living room to show her the elaborate blanket fort they'd built the night before. They ate dinner on the floor because Sophie insisted, Aurora sitting cross-legged on the carpet like she'd done it 100 times. She listened intently as Sophie explained the complex rules of the imaginary game they were playing, asking questions and playing along without a hint of the cold businesswoman Landon had first met. After Sophie went to bed, Aurora stayed. They sat on the couch with the television on low, not really watching, just existing in the same space. "Your apartment is nice," Aurora said. Landon snorted. "You don't have to lie." "I'm not. It's lived in. It feels like a home." She looked around at the toys scattered across the floor, the drawings taped to the refrigerator, the stack of library books on the coffee table. "My place doesn't feel like this." "That's because nobody actually lives there." Aurora smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "I know." She came back the next Friday, and the Friday after that. It became routine without them discussing it. Aurora showing up with dinner, Sophie lighting up like a firework, the three of them eating together and playing games and watching movies until Sophie fell asleep. Landon tried not to think too hard about what it meant. Tried not to notice how natural it felt when Aurora sat beside him on the couch, or the way Sophie had started calling her Aurora because Aurora was too hard to say, or how he'd started looking forward to Friday nights in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in years. They were still pretending, he told himself, just practicing for the lake house. But it was getting harder to remember why that mattered. Yes. The Thursday before they were supposed to leave, Landon's supervisor called him into the office. He went expecting another lecture about productivity or shift changes. Instead, he found his boss sitting behind the desk with an envelope in his hands. "Pierce, have a seat." Landon sat, his stomach sinking. "Is something wrong?" "Depends on how you look at it." His boss slid the envelope across the desk. "Corporate's downsizing. They're cutting 20 positions across all warehouses. You're on the list." The words didn't process at first. Landon stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "You're firing me?" "Last hired, first fired. It's nothing personal. You'll get 2 weeks severance." His boss at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Pierce. I know you've got a kid." Landon picked up the envelope with numb fingers. "When?" "End of the week. Friday's your last day." He walked out of the office in a daze, his mind completely blank. He finished his shift on autopilot, clocking out at 5 and sitting in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before he could make himself drive home. Sophie was at Mrs. Chen's. Landon sat alone in his apartment and stared at the severance letter, doing math in his head that didn't add up no matter how many times he tried. 2 weeks severance. Maybe a month of unemployment if he was lucky. Then nothing. He just paid rent. He had groceries. But after that, his phone buzzed. "Aurora, still good for tomorrow? My parents are excited to see you both." Landon typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on the truth. "Can I call you?" She answered on the first ring. "What's wrong? How do you know something's wrong?" "You never asked to call. You just text back random observations about your day." "What happened?" Landon leaned back against the couch, closing his eyes. "I got laid off today." Silence. "Landon, don't say you're sorry or offer me money or try to fix it. He stopped, not sure what he needed. "I just needed to tell someone." Okay. Aurora's voice was soft. Do you want to cancel this weekend? No. Actually, I think I need to get out of my head for a while. Then we'll go. And when we get back, we'll figure something out. Aurora, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. There was a pause. You've been there for me. Let me be there for you. Landon's throat tightened. Yeah, okay. Get some sleep. I'll pick you up at 9 tomorrow. Mwah. She hung up, and Landon sat in the quiet of his apartment, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Aurora arrived exactly at 9 the next morning in a different car, a black SUV instead of her usual sedan. Sophie bounced in her car seat the entire drive, chattering about swimming and boats and whether there would be fish in the lake. Landon stared out the window, trying to pull himself together. You okay? Aurora asked quietly when Sophie was distracted by her tablet. Not really, but I will be. She reached over and squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. The lake house was massive and rustic, all stone and exposed beams and huge windows overlooking the water. Maggie and Richard were waiting on the dock when they pulled up, waving enthusiastically. There they are. Maggie pulled Sophie into a hug the moment she was out of the car. Oh, I've missed you, sweetheart. Richard clapped Landon on the shoulder. Good to see you, son. You look tired. Long week, Landon said, managing a smile. Well, you're here now. That's what matters. Richard grabbed their bags. Come on, I'll show you to your room. The room was on the second floor with a view of the lake and a bed big enough to sleep 4 people. Landon set his bag down and looked at Aurora, who was standing in the doorway with an unreadable expression. Your parents think we're sharing a room, he said. I know. Aurora, there's a couch. She pointed to the oversized armchair by the window. You can sleep there. Or I can. We'll figure it out. They went back downstairs to find Sophie already in her swimsuit, begging Richard to take her down to the dock. Maggie had prepared lunch, sandwiches, and fresh fruit and lemonade that tasted like summer. It should have been perfect. It almost was. But Landon couldn't shake the weight sitting on his chest, the knowledge that in 2 weeks he'd be unemployed with a daughter to feed and bills that wouldn't stop coming. That night, after Sophie fell asleep in the bedroom they'd set up for her down the hall, Landon stood on the deck overlooking the lake. The water was black and still, reflecting the stars above. Couldn't sleep? He turned to find Aurora beside him, wrapped in a blanket. Too much in my head, he admitted. She moved closer, leaning against the railing. Want to talk about it? Not really. Okay. They stood in silence, the night air cool against their skin. After a while, Aurora reached out and took his hand, and Landon laced his fingers through hers without thinking. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me come here, for... He stopped, not sure how to finish. You don't have to thank me. Aurora looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. I meant what I said. I don't want to do this alone anymore. Landon turned to face her fully. This? What is this exactly? I don't know. Aurora's voice was barely a whisper. But I know it's not pretend anymore. Something shifted between them, the air suddenly thick with everything they'd been avoiding saying out loud. Landon reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. No, he agreed. It's not. Aurora leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. For a moment, they just stood there, the truth of what was happening settling around them like a blanket. Then Aurora pulled back, her expression conflicted. We should get some sleep. My parents want to take everyone out on the boat tomorrow. Yeah, okay. They went back inside, and Aurora took the couch without arguing. Landon lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondered when exactly he'd stopped pretending to care about the woman sleeping 10 feet away. The weekend passed in a haze of swimming and boat rides and family dinners. Sophie was in heaven, spending every moment she could with Maggie, who taught her to fish and braid friendship bracelets and bake cookies that were more burnt than golden. Richard pulled Landon aside Saturday afternoon while Aurora and Sophie were down at the dock. Can I give you some advice, son? Landon looked up from the book he wasn't actually reading. Sure, Ian? Don't let her push you away. Richard sat down in the chair across from him. Aurora spent the last 5 years building walls so high she convinced herself she didn't need anybody. But she does. Everybody does. I know. Do you? Richard leaned forward. Because when someone's been alone as long as she has, the first sign of trouble, and she'll run. She'll tell herself she's protecting you or protecting herself. But really, she's just scared. Landon set the book aside. Why are you telling me this? Because I can see the way you look at her, and I can see the way she looks at you when she thinks nobody's watching. Richard smiled. That's not fake, son. That's real. Don't let her convince you otherwise. Before Landon could respond, Sophie's voice rang out from the dock. Daddy! Daddy, come see! I caught a fish! He stood, but Richard caught his arm. Just remember what I said. She's worth fighting for. Landon nodded and headed down to the dock, where Sophie was proudly holding up the smallest fish he'd ever seen while Aurora took pictures and praised her like she'd landed a whale. Sunday came too fast. They packed up and said their goodbyes, Maggie making them promise to visit again soon. Sophie fell asleep in the car within 10 minutes, exhausted from the weekend. Aurora drove in silence, her hands tight on the steering wheel. Landon watched her profile, trying to read the thoughts racing behind her eyes. You're quiet, he said. Just thinking. About? Aurora glanced at him, then back at the road. About how much harder this is going to be now. What is? Saying goodbye. Her voice cracked slightly. Going back to our separate lives. Landon's chest tightened. Who says we have to? Aurora didn't answer. When they reached Landon's apartment building, she helped carry Sophie upstairs. They tucked her into bed together, moving around each other with the ease of people who'd done this 100 times. At the door, Aurora hesitated. I'll transfer the payment tonight. I told you I don't want your money. Landon, I mean it. He stepped closer, his heart pounding. I didn't do this for the money, not this time. Then why did you do it? He looked at her, really looked at her, and decided to stop lying to both of them. Because I wanted to spend time with you. Aurora's breath hitched. Landon, we can't. Why not? Because I'll ruin it. I ruin everything I touch. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You have a daughter, you have a life. You don't need me screwing it up. That's not your decision to make. Yes, it is. Aurora stepped back. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let this get so complicated. She turned toward the door, and Landon caught her wrist. Aurora, wait. I can't. She pulled away, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. She left, and Landon stood in his doorway, watching her disappear down the stairs, knowing she was running and not knowing how to stop her. His phone buzzed an hour later. A bank notification. $10,000 deposited into his account. Landon stared at the number and felt something crack inside his chest. She'd paid him. Like this was still just business. Like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. The question was whether Aurora would let herself admit it before she pushed him away completely. Landon didn't call. He didn't text. He left the money sitting in his account like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong and threw himself into job hunting with a desperation that made his hands shake. Sophie asked about Aurora every single day. When is Aurora coming over? I don't know, Bug. Can we call her? She's busy with work. But I miss her. I know, I miss her too. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Sophie looked at him with those two knowing eyes that saw more than a 6-year-old should. Then why don't you call her, Daddy? Because she made it clear she doesn't want this, Landon thought. Because she paid me like I was still just hired help. Because I'm an idiot for thinking it could be anything else. It's complicated, Sophie. Grown-ups always say that. Yeah, Landon thought, they do. He applied to 30 jobs in 2 weeks. He got 3 callbacks and 1 interview at a different warehouse across town that paid $2 less an hour. They told him they'd let him know. He knew what that meant. The unemployment check came, smaller than he'd hoped. He paid his utilities and bought groceries and watched his bank account drain like water through a sieve. The $10,000 Aurora had given him sat there untouched. He couldn't bring himself to use it, couldn't bring himself to send it back either. Friday came and went without Aurora showing up. Sophie sat by the window for an hour, waiting, before Landon finally convinced her to eat dinner. They had spaghetti out of a box and watched a movie neither of them really paid attention to. Landon tucked Sophie into bed that night and sat on the edge of her mattress, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Daddy? Yeah, bug? Did we do something wrong? Is that why Rora doesn't come anymore? Landon's chest cracked open. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why? Sometimes people get scared, even grown-ups. And when they get scared, they run away. Sophie thought about that for a moment. That's dumb. Yeah, Landon agreed quietly. It is. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light, then sat on the couch in the dark and let himself admit the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He'd fallen in love with Aurora Sinclair, and she'd walked away before he could tell her. His phone buzzed. For a split second, his heart jumped, hoping, but it was just a spam email about credit card debt. He tossed the phone aside and dropped his head into his hands. He needed to move on, find a job, take care of his daughter. Forget about the billionaire who'd hired him to play pretend and accidentally made him remember what it felt like to want something for himself. The knock on his door at 11 o'clock that night startled him so badly he almost didn't answer. Nobody knocked at 11. Nobody knocked at all unless it was Mrs. Chen borrowing sugar or the landlord with another complaint. Landon looked through the peephole and his breath stopped. Aurora stood in the hallway, still wearing a business suit, her hair pulled back, her eyes red like she'd been crying. He opened the door. What are you doing here? Ishko? I made a mistake. Aurora's voice was hoarse. Sending you that money, walking away, all of it. I made a mistake. Landon stepped aside. Come in. She walked into his apartment like she was walking into a confessional, her hands shaking. Landon closed the door and turned to face her. Talk to me, he said. Aurora wrapped her arms around herself. I've been sitting in my office for the past 2 weeks trying to convince myself I did the right thing. That walking away was protecting you, protecting Sophie. But tonight I was sitting at my desk at 11 o'clock working on a contract that doesn't matter, and I realized I was doing exactly what I've been doing for 5 years. Hiding. Aurora, let me finish. She looked at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes nearly broke him. I'm terrified, Landon. I haven't let myself care about someone since Marcus died because I know what it feels like to lose them. And when I started caring about you, about Sophie, I panicked. So I did what I always do. I threw money at it and ran. Landon crossed the space between them. And now? Now I'm here because I can't stop thinking about you. Either of you, and I don't want to hide anymore. Her voice cracked. I don't want to be alone in that empty apartment pretending I'm fine when I'm not. I don't want to pay people to care about me. She stopped, tears spilling down her cheeks. I want this to be real. Landon reached up and wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. It is real. It's been real for a while now. I know. Aurora closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I'm sorry I walked away. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry, too, for not fighting harder to make you stay. She opened her eyes and looked at him. What do we do now? Landon didn't have a plan, didn't have any answers, so he did the only thing that made sense. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, her face pressed against his chest, her fingers gripping his shirt like he might disappear. We figure it out, he said quietly, together. Aurora nodded against him, and they stood there in the middle of his tiny living room, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that wouldn't stop shaking. When she finally pulled back, her makeup was smeared and her eyes were swollen, and Landon thought she'd never looked more beautiful. I should go eat, Aurora said, but she didn't move. You could stay on the couch if you want. She looked at him, something soft and uncertain in her expression. Okay. Landon grabbed her a blanket and one of his old t-shirts to sleep in. Aurora changed in this bathroom and came out looking smaller, somehow, more human. She curled up on the couch, and Landon sat on the floor beside her, their hands linked in the space between them. Landon? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me. He squeezed her hand. Not possible. She fell asleep like that, her fingers still wrapped around his, and Landon sat on the floor watching her breathe and wondering how someone who had everything could look so lost. Sophie's shriek of joy when she found Aurora sleeping on the couch the next morning probably woke up half the building. She launched herself at Aurora, who caught her with a startled laugh. Rora! You came back. I did. Aurora hugged her tight, meeting Landon's eyes over Sophie's head. I'm sorry I stayed away. It's okay. You're here now. Sophie pulled back and studied Aurora's face with serious eyes. Were you sad? Aurora's expression faltered. Yeah, sweetheart, I was. Are you still sad? A little, but I'm getting better. Good. Sophie patted Aurora's cheek with the kind of matter-of-fact tenderness only children can pull off. Daddy was sad too, but he's better when you're here. Aurora looked at Landon, something raw and exposed in her eyes. He smiled and shrugged. She's not wrong. They made breakfast together, the three of them moving around the tiny kitchen in organized chaos. Sophie chattered about everything Aurora had missed, showing her drawings and toys and a loose tooth that was barely hanging on. Aurora listened to all of it with the kind of attention that made Sophie glow. And watching them together, Landon felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. After breakfast, Aurora's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her expression tightened. I need to take this. It's work. She stepped into Landon's bedroom and closed the door. He could hear her voice through the wall, sharp and professional, every trace of the soft woman from this morning buried under layers of business armor. When she came out 20 minutes later, her face was pale. What's wrong? Landon asked. Aurora looked at Sophie, who was coloring at the coffee table, then back at Landon. Can we talk? Privately? They went out into the hallway, closing the door behind them. Aurora leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. There's a problem. With the Meridian deal. Landon had no idea what the Meridian deal was, but he could hear the fear in her voice. What kind of problem? Basi Chimpu? The kind that could destroy my company if it goes wrong. Aurora opened her eyes. There's a man, James Harrington. He owns Harrington Industries. We've been competing for the same contract, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. I thought I had it locked down, but he just called one of my board members and made it clear he's not going to let me win. What does that mean? It means he'll do whatever it takes to make sure I lose. Sabotage, intimidation. He's done it before to other competitors. Aurora's hands were shaking. I can handle corporate warfare, Landon. I've been doing it for years. But he mentioned you, by name. Landon's blood ran cold. What? He said I'd gotten distracted lately. That maybe I should focus on my company instead of playing house with some warehouse worker and his kid. Aurora's voice broke. He knows about you. About Sophie. How? I don't know. But if he's willing to threaten you to get to me... She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. I can't let him hurt you, either of you. Landon grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Hey, we'll figure this out. You don't understand. James doesn't make empty threats. If he thinks he can use you against me, he will. Then we go to the police. And say what? That a billionaire implied something vaguely threatening on a phone call? They'll laugh us out of the station. Aurora pulled away from him. I need to handle this. My way. Aurora, don't do anything stupid. I won't. But her eyes said otherwise. I just need to make it clear that you're off limits. That threatening you won't get him anywhere. And how are you going to do that? She didn't answer. Landon's stomach twisted. Aurora, I need to go. She reached for the door. I'll call you later. Don't shut me out. Not again. Aurora looked at him, and for a moment he saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. I'm not. I promise. But I need to handle this before it gets worse. She kissed him quickly, desperately, and then she was gone. Landon stood in the hallway, staring at the space where she'd been, and felt the ground shifting beneath him again. Aurora didn't call that night, or the next day. Landon tried her number a dozen times and got voicemail every time. He texted her, each message more desperate than the last. Are you okay? Please just let me know you're safe. Aurora, you're scaring me. Nothing. By Monday afternoon, he was ready to drive to her office and demand answers. He'd just picked Sophie up from school when his phone finally rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Pierce? A woman's voice, professional and cold. This is Rebecca Chen, Aurora Sinclair's executive assistant. Ms. Sinclair asked me to inform you that she'll be unavailable for the next few weeks. She's handling a sensitive business matter and won't be able to take personal calls. Landon's grip on the phone tightened. Let me talk to her. I'm afraid that's not possible. Then tell her to call me herself. Mr. Pierce, tell her, Landon said through gritted teeth, that if she doesn't call me in the next hour, I'm coming to her office. There was a pause. I'll relay the message. The line went dead. Landon sat in his truck outside Sophie's school, his heart pounding. She was shutting him out. Again. And this time he wasn't going to let her get away with it. His phone rang 45 minutes later. Aurora. What the hell are you doing? Landon didn't bother with pleasantries. Protecting you. Aurora's voice was exhausted. Harrington's escalating. He's got private investigators following me. Digging into my personal life. If he finds out how much you mean to me, I don't care. Well, I do. Aurora's voice cracked. I won't let him hurt you, Landon. I won't let him use Sophie to get to me. So you're just going to disappear? Cut us off? It's temporary, just until I can neutralize the threat. And how are you planning to do that? Silence. Aurora, answer me. I'm meeting with him, tonight. I'm going to offer him a deal. He backs off, and I'll concede part of the contract. Give him what he wants so he leaves you alone. That's insane. You said this deal could make or break your company. It could, but you and Sophie are more important. The words hit Landon like a punch to the chest. Aurora, I have to go. I'm sorry. I'll call you when it's over. Where are you meeting him? Landon? Where? She hesitated. The construction site for the new tech center downtown. Neutral ground. His suggestion. Every instinct Landon had screamed that this was wrong. Don't go, please. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Aurora's voice softened. I love you, Landon. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. And I'm not going to let anyone hurt you because of me. The line went dead before he could respond. Landon sat there, Aurora's words echoing in his head. She loved him. She'd said it like a goodbye. He looked back at Sophie, buckled safely in her car seat, oblivious to the panic clawing through his chest. Daddy, are we going home? Landon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Aurora was walking into something dangerous, and she was doing it alone because she thought she had to protect him, like hell. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen. I need a huge favor. The construction site was a skeleton of steel beams and concrete platforms, half finished and abandoned for the night. Landon parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had no plan, no idea what he was going to do when he got there. He just knew he couldn't let Aurora face this alone. He heard voices before he saw them. Aurora's clear and controlled, a man's lower and threatening. Landon crept closer, staying in the shadows of the unfinished building. Aurora stood on a platform 30 feet up, accessible only by a temporary metal staircase. Across from her was a man in an expensive suit, mid-50s, with the kind of face that had probably never heard the word no. James Harrington. You're making this too easy, Ms. Sinclair, Harrington was saying. I expected more of a fight. I'm being practical. Aurora's voice didn't waver. You want part of the Meridian contract. Take it. Just leave the people in my personal life alone. And why would I do that? They're your weakness. As long as I can use them, I have leverage. You have what you want. There's no reason to involve them further. Harrington smiled, and it made Landon's skin crawl. See, that's where you're wrong. I don't just want part of the contract. I want all of it. And I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything you've built. Aurora's composure cracked. That wasn't the deal. There is no deal. You're going to withdraw your bid completely, or I'm going to make sure that boyfriend of yours loses a lot more than his job. I hear his daughter's school doesn't have the best security. Aurora went pale. You son of a... She lunged at him, and Harrington moved faster than a man his age should have been able to. He grabbed her arm, twisted, and shoved her hard toward the edge of the platform. Landon didn't think. He ran. Aurora! What? She spun at the sound of his voice, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The distraction cost her. Harrington grabbed her by the shoulders and threw her backward with enough force that she stumbled, her feet tangling in the construction equipment scattered across the platform. Time slowed. Landon watched Aurora's arms windmill as she fought for balance, her body tilting back toward the open edge. She fell. Landon's scream tore out of his throat as Aurora dropped over the side of the platform. But instead of plummeting 30 feet to the concrete below, she crashed onto a section of scaffolding 15 feet down, her body hitting the metal poles with a sickening crack. She didn't move. Landon was already running, taking the metal stairs 3 at a time. Harrington stood frozen on the platform above, his face pale with shock. "You killed her," Landon heard himself say. "You killed her. She came at me. It was self-defense." Landon didn't wait to hear more. He scrambled down to the scaffolding, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the metal. Aurora lay crumpled on the platform, blood seeping from a gash on her forehead, her arm bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. "Aurora, Aurora, please." He touched her face and she was warm. He pressed his fingers to her neck and felt a pulse, weak but there. "Oh, thank God. Stay with me. Please stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Landon." "I'm here. Don't move. I'm calling for help." He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed 911, giving them the address and begging them to hurry. Above him, he could hear Harrington scrambling down the stairs, running. Let him run. Landon didn't care about anything except the woman bleeding in his arms. "You weren't supposed to be here," Aurora whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah, well, I don't listen very well." Landon smoothed her hair back from her face, trying not to look at the blood. "Save your strength. The ambulance is coming." He threatened Sophie. "I know." "I couldn't," she coughed, wincing, "couldn't let him hurt her." "I know, but you're going to be okay. You hear me? You're going to be fine." Aurora's hand found his, her grip weak. "I love you. I should have said it sooner." "You said it, and I love you too. So you don't get to die on me, understand? Sophie needs you. I need you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Aurora's eyes drifted closed. "Aurora, Aurora, stay awake. Look at me." She forced her eyes open one more time. "Tell Sophie. Tell her I'm sorry. You can tell her yourself." Landon was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "You're going to be fine." But even as he said it, he watched her eyes close again and felt her grip go slack in his hand. The paramedics arrived in a blur of flashing lights and shouted instructions. They loaded Aurora onto a stretcher, checking her vitals, starting an IV, moving with the kind of controlled urgency that meant things were bad. "Are you family?" one of them asked Landon. He stopped. He wasn't family. He was just some guy she'd hired to pretend. "I'm her boyfriend. You can ride with us." Landon climbed into the ambulance and sat beside Aurora's stretcher, holding her hand while the paramedic worked. He called Mrs. Chen and asked her to keep Sophie overnight, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what happened. At the hospital, they took Aurora straight to surgery. Landon sat in the waiting room, covered in her blood, and stared at the white walls until they blurred. Hours passed. He didn't move. Couldn't move. A doctor finally emerged, exhausted and grim. "Are you here for Aurora Sinclair?" Landon stood on shaking legs. "Yeah. Is she—" "She's alive. Barely. She has a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a shattered arm. She lost a lot of blood. The next 48 hours are critical." Landon's knees gave out. He sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. "Can I see her?" "She's in the ICU. Immediate family only." See, all, please." Landon looked up at the doctor. "Please, I need to see her." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Aurora looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and kept her alive. Her head was wrapped in bandages, her arm in a cast, tubes and wires running from her body to monitors that Landon couldn't read. He sank into the chair beside her bed and took her uninjured hand in both of his. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere, so you need to fight, okay? You need to come back." Aurora didn't respond. The machines beeped steadily, the only sound in the room. Landon sat there, holding her hand, and prayed to a god he wasn't sure he believed in that she would wake up. Chintz. The police came the next morning. Landon told them everything: the threats, the meeting, watching Harrington throw Aurora off the platform. They took his statement and left to track Harrington down. Landon stayed in the ICU waiting room, surviving on vending machine coffee and adrenaline. Aurora's assistant, Rebecca, showed up at some point and brought him a change of clothes. She looked shell-shocked. "Is she going to make it?" Rebecca asked. "I don't know. The board is asking questions. The media is already sniffing around. If she dies, she's not going to die." Landon said it with more conviction than he felt. Aurora's parents arrived late that night, having caught the first flight they could. Maggie collapsed into Landon's arms, sobbing, while Richard stood pale and silent, staring at the closed ICU doors like he could will his daughter back to consciousness. "What happened?" Maggie asked through her tears. Landon told them everything: the contract dispute, Harrington's threats, Aurora trying to protect him, and Sophie. By the time he finished, Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years. "She was trying to save you," Maggie said softly. "I know." Landon's voice broke. "I should have stopped her." "You couldn't have." Richard gripped his shoulder. "When Aurora makes up her mind, there's no stopping her. She got that from me." They sat together in the waiting room, three people bound by their love for a woman who might not survive the night. But Aurora Sinclair had never given up on anything in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. Aurora didn't wake up for 3 days. Landon barely left the hospital. He sat beside her bed during visiting hours, holding her hand and talking to her about nothing and everything. He told her about Sophie's loose tooth finally falling out, about the job interview he'd missed because he refused to leave, about how her mother had brought him terrible hospital cafeteria sandwiches and sat with him in silence when words felt impossible. The doctor said her vitals were stable, that her body was healing, that she just needed time. But time felt like it was moving through thick mud, every hour stretching into something unbearable. On the 4th morning, Landon woke up in the chair beside her bed with a crick in his neck and found Aurora's eyes open, staring at him. "Hey," she whispered, her voice raw and cracked. Landon's vision blurred. "Hey yourself. You look terrible." He laughed, the sound catching in his throat. "You're one to talk." Aurora tried to smile and winced. "How long?" 4 days. You scared the hell out of us." She closed her eyes, tears leaking from those corners. "I'm sorry." "Don't." Landon squeezed her hand gently. "Don't apologize. Just focus on getting better. Harrington is in custody. They arrested him 2 days ago. Assault, attempted murder, corporate espionage. He's not getting out anytime soon." Aurora's eyes opened again. "How?" "You had your phone in your pocket. Voice recorder was running the whole time. Got everything he said on tape." Landon brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. Not smart enough to avoid getting thrown off a building." "Aurora, I could have died." Her voice broke. "I almost died, and all I could think about was that I'd never get to tell you how much you mean to me, how much Sophie means to me." Landon leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "You told me, right before the ambulance came. You told me you loved me. I meant it. I know. I love you too." They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, alive together. Then Aurora pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his face. "Where's Sophie?" "With your parents. They've been taking care of her while I've been here." Landon smiled. "She made you about 50 get-well cards. Your mom had to stop her from mailing them all to the hospital." Aurora's expression softened. "Can I see her?" "Let me check with the doctor first, but yeah, I think she'd like that." The doctor cleared Sophie for a short visit that afternoon. Maggie brought her in, holding her hand tightly. Sophie's eyes went wide when she saw Aurora in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and bandages. Aurora? Her voice was small, scared. Come here, sweetheart. Aurora held out her good hand. I'm okay. Sophie approached slowly, like she was afraid Aurora might break. When she got close enough, Aurora pulled her into a gentle hug, and Sophie burst into tears. I thought you were going to die. I know. I'm sorry I scared you. Aurora held her as tight as she could with one arm. But I'm still here. I'm going to be fine. Promise? I promise. Me. Sophie pulled back and studied Aurora's face seriously. You have to stop doing dangerous things. Daddy says you're not allowed to do dangerous things anymore. Aurora looked at Landon over Sophie's head, something warm and broken in her eyes. Your daddy's right. No more dangerous things. Whoa. Draktil. Sophie nodded firmly, then climbed carefully onto the bed and curled up against Aurora's side, her small hand resting on Aurora's chest like she needed to feel her breathing. Landon watched them together and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This wasn't pretend anymore. This wasn't temporary. This was his family, broken and stitched together and real. Maggie touched his shoulder. Come on, let's give them a minute. Well, they stepped out into the hallway, and Maggie pulled him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. Thank you, she said quietly, for being there, for saving her. I didn't save her. The paramedics, you called them. You stayed with her. You've been here every day. Maggie pulled back and looked at him with eyes that were fierce and grateful. You love her. Really love her. That's all I've ever wanted for my daughter. Landon's throat closed up. Yeah, I do. Good, because she loves you too, and Sophie. Maggie smiled through her tears. You're family now, Landon, whether you like it or not. He found himself smiling back. I like it just fine. Aurora spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The doctors monitored her constantly, adjusting medications and checking for complications. Her collapsed lung reinflated. Her ribs began to heal. The head injury turned out to be less severe than they'd feared, though she had headaches that made her nauseous and dizzy. Landon visited every day, usually bringing Sophie after school. They'd sit on the bed together, Sophie chattering about her day while Aurora listened with an attention that never wavered, even when Landon could see the exhaustion pulling at her. Richard and Maggie extended their stay indefinitely. They rented an apartment nearby and took turns sitting with Aurora when Landon couldn't be there. The 4 of them, 5 counting Sophie, became a strange little unit bound together by crisis and love. One afternoon, while Sophie was down in the hospital cafeteria with Maggie getting ice cream, Rebecca showed up with a tablet and a stack of papers. No, Landon said immediately. She's supposed to be resting. I am resting. Aurora held out her hand for the tablet. What's the damage, Rebecca? Well, the board wants to meet. Harrington's arrest has caused some instability in the market. Investors are nervous. Rebecca hesitated. There's also been some media speculation about your personal life. Aurora's expression hardened. What kind of speculation? Nothing terrible. Just questions about who Landon is, how long you've been together, whether your relationship played a role in the incident with Harrington. That's nobody's business. I agree, but you know how it is. People are curious. Landon stood. I can leave if you need to. Stay. Aurora grabbed his hand. I want you here. He sat back down, and Aurora turned her attention to Rebecca. Schedule the board meeting for next week. I'll dial in remotely if I have to, and draft a statement about my personal life. What should it say? Aurora looked at Landon, something vulnerable flickering across her face. That I'm in a committed relationship, that my personal life is private, and that anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me directly. Rebecca typed rapidly. Got it. Anything else? Yeah, I want a full investigation into Harrington's business practices. If he was willing to threaten me, he's probably done it to others. Find them. Build a case. On it. Rebecca gathered her papers. It's good to have you back, boss. After she left, Landon squeezed Aurora's hand. You don't have to do this now. The company can wait. The company is 3,000 people's livelihoods. It can't wait. Aurora leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. But I'm going to do things differently this time. How? Whoa, yeah. I'm going to stop treating it like the only thing that matters. She turned to look at him. Because it's not. You are. Sophie is. My parents are. And I almost died before I figured that out. Landon climbed onto the bed beside her, careful of her injuries, and pulled her against his chest. She relaxed into him with a sigh that sounded like relief. I've been thinking, Aurora said quietly. About? What happens when I get out of here? Where I go? What comes next? Landon's heart kicked up. And? That penthouse doesn't feel like home. It never did. It's just a place I sleep when I'm too tired to work. She tilted her head to look at him. But your apartment feels like home, even though it's tiny and the water heater is broken half the time and Sophie's toys are everywhere. Are you saying you want to move into my apartment? Landon asked carefully, because I don't think we'd all fit. Aurora laughed, then winced and pressed a hand to her ribs. No, I'm saying maybe we should find somewhere new, together, somewhere that's ours. Landon stared at her. You're serious? Completely. Aurora's eyes searched his. I know it's fast. I know we've only really been together for a few months. But I'm tired of wasting time pretending I don't know what I want. I want you. I want Sophie. I want a life that isn't just boardrooms and contracts and empty apartments. Aurora, you can say no. I know it's a lot, and I know I come with baggage. Landon kissed her, cutting off the words. It was gentle, mindful of her injuries, but it carried everything he couldn't figure out how to say. When he pulled back, Aurora was staring at him with wide eyes. Yes, Landon said simply. Let's find a place together. Aurora's smile was the brightest thing he'd seen in weeks. Yeah? Yeah. She kissed him again, and Landon held her as carefully as he could, feeling like someone had just handed him a future he hadn't known how to imagine. 8. Aurora came home 3 weeks after the accident. Not to her penthouse, but to Landon's apartment, where Sophie had made the banner that said, Welcome home, Rora, in crooked letters, and enough glitter to coat the entire living room. Richard and Maggie helped get her settled on the couch, surrounded by pillows and blankets. Aurora was still weak, her arm in a cast, moving slowly and carefully. But she was alive. She was here. Sophie refused to leave her side, curling up against her and telling her elaborate stories about everything that had happened while she was in the hospital. Aurora listened with her eyes closed, her good hand stroking Sophie's hair, a small smile on her face. She's exhausted, Maggie whispered to Landon in the kitchen. I know, but she won't admit it. Stubborn, just like her father. Maggie smiled. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Maggie squeezed his arm. We're heading back home next week. Richard needs to get back to work, and Aurora's stable enough now. But we'll visit, often. You better. That night, after Sophie went to bed and Richard and Maggie left for their rental apartment, Landon helped Aurora change into comfortable clothes and get settled in his bed. She moved stiffly, every motion clearly painful, though she tried to hide it. I can take the couch, Landon offered. Don't you dare. Aurora patted the space beside her. I've been sleeping alone in a hospital bed for 3 weeks. Get over here. He climbed in carefully, and Aurora immediately curled against his side, her head on his chest. Landon wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. This is nice, Aurora murmured. Yeah? Yeah, better than the penthouse. Landon kissed the top of her head. Everything's better with you in it. She tilted her face up to look at him. Even almost dying? Ora chiki. Don't joke about that. Sorry, Aurora sobered. I know it was scary for all of you, but I meant what I said in the hospital. I'm changing things, starting now. How? I promoted Rebecca to COO. She'll handle the day-to-day operations while I focus on the bigger picture. I'm also stepping back from some of the boards I'm on, delegating more. Aurora traced patterns on his chest with her finger. And I'm taking weekends off, no exceptions. But, Taki Shomoshi. Landon raised an eyebrow. You? Taking weekends off? I have a family now. Family comes first. The word hit Landon square in the chest. Family. That's what they were becoming, the three of them. Not through blood or legal paperwork, but through choice and love and showing up when it mattered. I like the sound of that, he said quietly. Aurora smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into sleep. Landon lay awake, holding her, and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. House hunting with a 6-year-old and a billionaire recovering from major injuries was exactly as chaotic as Landon expected. Sophie had very specific requirements. The house needed a big backyard for playing, and a tree for climbing, and a room that could be pink, preferably with sparkles. Aurora's requirements were more practical but equally firm. Good school district, safe neighborhood, close enough to her office that she could get there if needed, but far enough away that she didn't feel like she was living at work. Landon just wanted something they could afford without Aurora paying for everything, which proved to be the hardest requirement to meet. I have money, Aurora said for the 10th time as they toured a house that was nice but way out of Landon's price range. Let me use it. I want to contribute. You are contributing. You're here. You're helping me heal. You're being a father to Sophie and a partner to me. That's worth more than money. Landon stopped in the middle of the empty living room and looked at her. Aurora stood in a shaft of sunlight from the window, her arms still in a cast but her eyes bright and alive. I need to feel like I'm pulling my weight, he said quietly. Then get a job you love, something that makes you happy, and let me handle the mortgage. Aurora crossed to him and took his hand. We're a team, Landon. That means we use the resources we have. And right now, I have financial resources. You have emotional ones. Together, we make it work. Sophie ran in from exploring the backyard. Daddy, Aurora, there's a swing. Can we get this house, please? Landon looked at Aurora. She smiled. What do you think? She asked. He thought about waking up here every morning. Thought about Sophie growing up in a backyard with a swing. Thought about building a life with Aurora that wasn't based on pretending or fear or desperation. Yeah, he said, let's get this house. Sophie screamed and threw herself at both of them, and they caught her together, laughing. The paperwork took 2 months to finalize. In the meantime, Aurora officially moved out of her penthouse and into Landon's tiny apartment. It was cramped and ridiculous, the three of them tripping over each other constantly. But it was also full of laughter and life and the kind of messy happiness Landon had forgotten existed. Aurora attended her board meetings via video call from Landon's kitchen table. She reviewed contracts while Sophie did homework beside her. She learned to cook simple meals, burning half of them and turning the rest into experiments that Sophie found hilarious. Landon finally found a job he didn't hate, managing logistics for a small nonprofit that distributed food to families in need. The pay was less than the warehouse, but Aurora was right. They had financial resources, and this job made him feel like he was doing something that mattered. They moved into the new house on a Saturday in June. Richard and Maggie flew in to help, along with Mrs. Chen and a handful of Landon's old co-workers who'd become friends over the years. Sophie claimed the pink room immediately, Aurora set up a home office in the spare bedroom, and Landon stood in the kitchen of their house and felt like he'd somehow stumbled into someone else's life. You okay? Aurora asked, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. Yeah, just processing. Processing what? That this is real, that we're here, that I get to keep you. Yeah. Aurora turned him around to face her. Her cast had come off the week before, and she was finally moving without pain. You're not getting rid of me, Landon Pierce. You're stuck with me. Good. He kissed her, soft and slow, because I don't plan on going anywhere. Sophie ran through the kitchen, chasing after a box she'd declared her treasure chest. Maggie and Richard were arguing good-naturedly about where the couch should go. The house smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings, and for the first time in years, Landon felt like he could breathe. 3 months later, Aurora stood in front of a room full of reporters and announced the launch of the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping single parents pay medical bills, cover rent, and access resources they couldn't afford on their own. I started this company from nothing, Aurora said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. I built it through hard work and determination and a lot of luck. But I also know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like you're drowning and nobody's coming to save you. She glanced at Landon, who stood at the back of the room holding Sophie's hand. Someone saved me. Not with money, but with love, with family, with the reminder that success doesn't mean anything if you don't have people to share it with. Aurora looked back at the cameras. This foundation is my way of paying that forward, of making sure that parents like Landon Pierce don't have to choose between feeding their kids and paying their bills, that families get the support they need to survive. The reporters erupted with questions, but Aurora just smiled and stepped away from the podium. She made her way through the crowd to where Landon and Sophie waited. "How'd I do?" she asked. "You were perfect," Landon said. Sophie tugged on Aurora's sleeve. "Can we go home now? You promised we could make cookies." Aurora laughed and scooped her up with one arm. "Yeah, Bug, let's go home." They walked out of the press conference together, leaving the cameras and questions behind. In the parking lot, Landon caught Aurora's hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yeah, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." Aurora leaned in and kissed him, and Sophie made exaggerated gagging noises from Aurora's hip. "Gross, no kissing." "Sorry, sweetheart," Aurora said, not looking sorry at all. "But you're going to have to get used to it." "Why?" Landon and Aurora exchanged a look. They'd been talking about this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But standing here in the parking lot with the sun setting and Sophie squirming between them, Landon realized there would never be a perfect moment. There was just now. "Because I'm going to ask your dad to marry me," Aurora said, her eyes locked on Landon's. Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really?" Aurora set her down and turned to Landon. "I know I'm supposed to wait for you to ask, and I know we're doing everything backwards, but I've never been good at following rules." She pulled a small box from her jacket pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple silver band. "Landon Pierce, you and Sophie are the best things that ever happened to me. You taught me that love isn't something you can buy or fake or hide from. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice. And I choose you, every single day. So will you marry me?" Landon's vision blurred. He looked at Sophie, who was bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement, then back at Aurora, who was watching him with her heart in her eyes. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking. "Yeah, I'll marry you." Aurora slipped the ring onto his finger, and Sophie launched herself at both of them, shrieking with joy. They stood there in the parking lot, the three of them holding on to each other, and Landon thought about how far they'd come. From a desperate online ad to a fake relationship to almost losing everything to this. Standing in the sunset with the woman he loved and the daughter he'd do anything for. Building a family from broken pieces. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and still a little scary sometimes. But it was real. And that was more than enough. Planning a wedding turned out to be significantly harder than falling in love. Sophie had opinions. Loud, insistent, completely unreasonable opinions that involved unicorns, a cake taller than the house, and inviting her entire first-grade class plus their pets. "Bug, we can't have 23 kids and 15 dogs at the wedding," Landon said for the fourth time that week. "Why not?" "Because it would be chaos." Sophie crossed her arms, her expression eerily similar to Aurora's when she was being stubborn. "You said it was my wedding too." "It is, but then I want dogs." Aurora looked up from her laptop, where she was supposed to be reviewing venue options, but had clearly been listening to the entire conversation. "What if we compromise? No dogs at the ceremony, but we can have a dog at the reception. Just one, a really well-behaved one." Sophie's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. I'll talk to a friend who has a therapy dog. We can have her there for an hour." "Yes!" Sophie threw her arms around Aurora's neck. "You're the best mom ever." The room went silent. Sophie froze, realizing what she'd said. Aurora's eyes widened, and Landon felt his throat close up. I mean... Sophie pulled back, her face bright red. "I didn't mean... Hey." Aurora cupped Sophie's face gently. "It's okay. But you're not my real mom. My real mom is in heaven." Aurora's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "That's right. Your mom is in heaven, and she loves you very much. And I could never replace her. But I love you too, Sophie. And if you want to call me Mom, I would be honored." Sophie's bottom lip trembled. Even though I already have a mom? You can have two moms. One who watches over you from heaven, and one who's here with you now. Your heart is big enough for both. Sophie launched herself back into Aurora's arms, crying. Aurora held her tight, her own tears falling freely. Landon watched them together and felt something fundamental settle in his chest. This was his family, imperfect and stitched together from broken pieces, but real. So completely real. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Landon found Aurora standing on their back porch, staring out at the yard where fireflies blinked in the darkness. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Aurora leaned back against him. "She called me Mom. I heard. I never thought," her voice caught. "I never thought I'd get this. A family, a daughter who loves me, a life that feels like it actually matters." Landon turned her around to face him. "You always mattered. Not like this. Before I mattered because of what I could do. How much money I could make, how many deals I could close, but now..." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "Now I matter because Sophie needs help with her homework. Because you need someone to talk to after a hard day. Because I'm part of something bigger than myself." "You're part of us," Landon said simply. Aurora kissed him, soft and slow. "Best decision I ever made." "What, proposing to some random guy you found online?" "Hiring you was the best decision. Proposing was just common sense." Landon laughed and pulled her closer. "We're getting married in 2 months." "I know. Are you nervous?" "Terrified." Me too," Aurora smiled. "But I'm also happier than I've ever been. So I figure that's a good sign." "Yeah," and Landon agreed, kissing her forehead. "It's a pretty good sign." The Phoenix Foundation officially opened its doors 6 weeks before the wedding. The office was modest compared to Aurora's corporate headquarters, but it was warm and welcoming, designed to feel less like a business and more like a community center. Landon had taken a position as the director of outreach, working directly with families who needed support. It was exhausting and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also the most meaningful work he'd ever done. On opening day, they helped 12 families. Single parents who were drowning in medical debt, struggling to keep the lights on, choosing between rent and food. People who looked exactly like Landon had looked 2 years ago, desperate and scared and barely holding on. By the end of the first month, they'd helped over 100 families. The foundation paid medical bills, covered rent, provided groceries, connected people with resources they didn't know existed. Word spread quickly, and soon they had more applications than they could handle. "We need to expand," Aurora said one evening, reviewing the numbers at their kitchen table while Landon made dinner. "We're turning away families who need help. We're only 3 months old. We can't expand yet." "Well, why not?" "Because we need to make sure we're sustainable first. We can't help people if we burn out in the first year." Aurora looked up at him, and Landon saw the struggle in her eyes. She wanted to fix everything immediately, throw money at every problem until it disappeared. But she was learning that some things took time. "You're right," she said finally. "We'll build slowly. Make sure we're doing this right." Landon crossed to her and kissed the top of her head. "Look at you, being patient. Don't get used to it." He laughed and went back to stirring the pasta. Sophie was at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving them with a rare, quiet evening. They ate dinner on the couch, Aurora's feet in Landon's lap, talking about the foundation and the wedding and whether they should get a dog. "Sophie would lose her mind if we got a dog," Landon said. "I know. That's why I'm seriously considering it." "Mummy, muchas. You hate dogs." "I don't hate them. I've just never had one." Aurora tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe we should wait until after the wedding. Give ourselves time to adjust to being married before we add a puppy to the chaos." Smart thinking. They fell into comfortable silence, the television playing some show neither of them was watching. Landon ran his hand along Aurora's calf, marveling at how normal this felt. How easy. "Can I tell you something?" Aurora asked quietly. "Always. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I get to have this." She gestured around the room, at their house, their life. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." Landon squeezed her foot gently. "Things will go wrong. That's life. But we'll handle it together. How are you so calm about everything? Calm. I'm not. I'm terrified most of the time. Landon smiled. But I've learned that being scared doesn't mean you stop moving forward. It just means you hold on tighter to the people you love. Aurora sat up and crawled across the couch to him, settling into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. I love you. I love you too. Us. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of their home, and Landon thought about how far they'd both come, from two people running away from their pain to two people building something worth running toward. The wedding was small and simple, held in the backyard of their house under a canopy of string lights and late summer stars. Maggie cried through the entire ceremony. Richard gave a speech that made everyone laugh and then cry. Sophie served as the flower girl and took her job so seriously that she counted every single petal she threw to make sure they were evenly distributed. Aurora wore a simple white dress that made her look softer than Landon had ever seen her. He wore the same gray suit she'd bought him for their first fake weekend together, because it felt right to wear something that connected their beginning to this moment. The officiant was a friend of Richard's, and he kept the ceremony short and sweet. When it came time for vows, Aurora went first. Landon, 2 years ago I was convinced I had everything figured out. I had success, money, power. But I was completely alone, and I didn't even realize how miserable that made me. Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. You showed me that love isn't something you can buy or fake. It's something you build, day by day, through showing up and being honest and choosing each other even when it's hard. You and Sophie gave me a family I didn't know I needed. You gave me a life worth living, and I promise to spend every day making sure you know how much that means to me. Landon had to blink hard to keep his own tears from falling. When it was his turn, he looked at Aurora and saw everything they'd survived reflected in her eyes. Aurora, I spent 2 years after Claire died just trying to survive. I forgot how to live. I forgot that I deserved to be happy. And then you showed up in my life disguised as a business arrangement, and you reminded me that it's okay to want more, that it's okay to let someone in. You didn't fix me. Nobody can do that. But you loved me anyway, broken pieces and all. And that's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. I promise to love you the same way, through the mess and the fear and the hard days. You and Sophie are my family, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how much you matter. They exchanged rings. Landon's the silver band Aurora had given him when she proposed. Aurora's a matching one he'd picked out with Sophie's help. When the officiant pronounced them married, Sophie cheered so loudly that several people laughed. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted. Good food, better music, and the people they loved most. Sophie danced with everyone, her dress spinning around her as she laughed. The therapy dog Aurora had promised made an appearance and immediately became the most popular guest. Near the end of the night, Landon found Aurora sitting on the porch steps, watching their friends and family dance in the backyard. Hey, Mrs. Pierce, he said, sitting beside her. Aurora smiled. I'm keeping Sinclair professionally, but I like the sound of that anyway. Fair enough. Landon took her hand, playing with the wedding band on her finger. Happy? Deliriously. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You? Yeah, I really am. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophie teach Richard how to do some complicated dance moves she'd learned at school. Maggie was taking pictures of everything, her face glowing with joy. I was thinking, Aurora said quietly, about the foundation. Yeah? I want to expand it, not just financial support for single parents, but resources for people who've lost someone. Grief counseling, support groups, practical help with the overwhelming logistics of loss. She looked at him. I think if Marcus and I had access to something like that, if Claire's family had it, things might have been different. Landon's throat tightened. That's a good idea. Landon's throat. I'll need your help. You understand that kind of loss in a way I don't. We both understand it, just differently. He squeezed her hand. And yeah, I'll help. We can build it together. Aurora kissed his cheek. Thank you. Sophie ran up to them, breathless and grinning. Come dance, both of you. We're old, Landon protested. We need to rest. You're not old. You're only like 100. Aurora laughed. I think that's her way of calling us ancient. Come on! Sophie grabbed both their hands and pulled. Please? Landon looked at Aurora, who was already smiling. They let Sophie drag them back to the makeshift dance floor, and the three of them spun around under the stars while their friends and family cheered. Later, after everyone had gone home and Sophie had finally crashed in her bed still wearing her flower girl dress, Landon and Aurora stood in their kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and half-empty wine glasses. We should clean this up, Aurora said without making any move to do so. Probably. Or we could leave it until morning. I like that plan better. They headed upstairs, leaving the mess for tomorrow. In their bedroom, Aurora changed out of her wedding dress and into one of Landon's old t-shirts. He watched her move around the room, still amazed that this was his life now. What? Aurora asked, catching him staring. Nothing. Just thinking about how lucky I am. We're both lucky. She climbed into bed beside him. Two broken people who found each other at exactly the right time. Landon pulled her close. You really believe that? That the timing was right? I think if we'd met before, we wouldn't have been ready. You were still grieving, Claire. I was still running from Marcus's death. We both needed to hit bottom before we could let someone catch us. Aurora traced patterns on his chest. So yeah, I think the timing was perfect. Even though we started as a lie? Especially because of that. The lie forced us to be honest about everything else. She looked up at him. We couldn't hide from each other, even when we wanted to. And that's what made this real. Landon kissed her, slow and deep, and felt the truth of her words settle around them. They'd built something genuine out of desperation and pretense, and somehow that made it stronger. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you too. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, exhausted and happy and home. 1 year after answering the online ad that changed his life, Landon stood in the foundation's office and watched a single mother cry tears of relief when he told her they'd paid off her daughter's medical bills. I don't understand, the woman kept saying. Why would you do this? Because someone helped me when I needed it most, Landon said, and now we're passing it forward. The woman left with a folder full of resources and a check that would cover her rent for 3 months. Aurora watched from the doorway of her office, and when the woman was gone, she crossed to Landon and wrapped her arms around him. That never gets easier, does it? She said quietly. No, but it never stops mattering. They'd helped over 500 families in the past year. The foundation had expanded to include grief counseling services, legal aid for families dealing with end-of-life issues, and a scholarship program for kids who'd lost parents. It was growing faster than either of them had anticipated, funded by Aurora's wealth, but driven by something much more valuable, the knowledge that loss didn't have to mean the end of everything. That night, they picked Sophie up from school together. She ran out of the building with a paper clutched in her hand, her face glowing. I got an A on my science project. That's my girl, Aurora said, pulling her into a hug. Our girl, Landon corrected, ruffling Sophie's hair. Sophie looked between them, her expression suddenly serious. Can I ask you something? Of course, Bugs. Emma at school says I'm lucky because I have 2 moms, one in heaven and one here. Is that true? Am I lucky? Landon and Aurora exchanged a look. They'd talked about this before, about how to help Sophie understand her complicated family situation without making her feel like something was missing. Yeah, Landon said, crouching down to her level. You're lucky, but not because you have 2 moms, though that is pretty special. You're lucky because you're loved. By me, by Mom, by Grandma and Grandpa Sinclair, by Mrs. Chen and all your teachers and friends. You're surrounded by people who care about you. And your first mom? Sophie asked quietly. She loved me too, right? She loved you more than anything in the world, Landon said, his voice thick. And she'd be so proud of the person you're becoming. Sophie thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I think I'm pretty lucky then. She skipped ahead to the car, leaving Landon and Aurora standing on the sidewalk. Aurora took his hand. You handled that perfectly. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. We all are. That's called parenting. Aurora squeezed his hand. But you're doing a good job. They drove home together, Sophie chattering about her day from the back seat. The house smelled like the slow cooker meal they'd started that morning. Sophie's homework spread across the kitchen table, while Aurora helped her with math and Landon made a salad. It was ordinary and mundane and completely unremarkable. It was also the most beautiful thing Landon had ever experienced. After dinner, they watched a movie together on the couch, Sophie wedged between them. She fell asleep halfway through, her head on Aurora's lap, her feet in Landon's. "Should we move her to bed?" Aurora whispered. "Not yet. I like this." They sat there, the movie playing to its conclusion, neither of them really watching. Landon looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, at his wife gently stroking Sophie's hair, and felt something profound settle in his chest. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without scars or complications, but real. Built from honesty and choice and showing up even when it was hard. He'd started this journey desperate and alone, answering an ad because he was out of options. He'd lied and pretended and nearly lost everything that mattered. But somewhere along the way, the lie had become truth. The pretense had become real. And he'd found something he didn't even know he was looking for. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on love. Eventually, they carried Sophie to bed. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over, clutching her stuffed unicorn. Aurora pulled the blanket up to her chin and kissed her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered. In their own bedroom, Landon and Aurora got ready for bed in comfortable silence. She brushed her teeth while he changed into pajamas. He set the alarm while she braided her hair. Small, domestic moments that had become the foundation of their life together. "Landon?" Aurora said as they climbed into bed. "Yeah?" "Thank you." For what? For answering that ad. For taking a chance on me. For not giving up when I tried to push you away. She turned to face him in the darkness. "For giving me a life worth living." Landon pulled her close. "Thank you for hiring me. For seeing past the desperation to something worth keeping. For loving my daughter like she's your own." "She is my own. I know. That's what makes you amazing." They lay together in the quiet, listening to the house settle around them. Somewhere down the hall, Sophie was dreaming. Outside, the world kept turning. But here, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. "We did it," Aurora said softly. "We actually built something real." "Yeah," Landon agreed. "We did." And as sleep pulled him under, Landon thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the online ad, and the fake relationship, and the moment he'd realized he'd fallen in love with the broken, beautiful woman in his arms. About nearly losing her and fighting to keep her and choosing each other every single day since. He thought about the families they were helping through the foundation, giving them the second chance he'd been given. About Sophie growing up knowing she was loved by so many people. About the life they were building together, imperfect and messy and absolutely worth every struggle. Love, Landon had learned, wasn't something you found. It was something you built, brick by brick, choice by choice, through showing up and being honest and refusing to run when things got hard. It was answering an ad when you were desperate and out of options. It was a billionaire learning to be human again. It was a little girl teaching two broken adults how to be a family. It was messy and complicated and sometimes terrifying, but it was also the most worthwhile thing Landon had ever done. And as he drifted off to sleep with Aurora safe in his arms and Sophie safe down the hall, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some lies, when they're built on truth and love and desperate hope, have a way of becoming the most honest thing you've ever experienced. And sometimes, the family you choose is the one that saves you.